Vagisha for her brilliant emceeing, and Kasun and Tudor for their presentations on my book. I'm most grateful for your generosity and support, and I will continue the discussion that you have started, but very briefly, given that we have limited time here. I said earlier that I would talk about futures and alternative scenarios. But before I do that, we have to recognize some basic geopolitical realities. And I think that Professor Tudor has mentioned some of them, but I will bring to the fore some essential facts that we need to face. We live in a world dominated by a handful of megalithic corporations that control every sector of life: production, reproduction, and increasingly consciousness as well. As I have discussed in Crisis in Sri Lanka and the World, BlackRock, the financial investing firm, is said to be ruling the world. And as Professor Tudor said, finance capital rules the world, and BlackRock is at the very top of it. And we must not forget that BlackRock is also one of the largest, if not the largest, ISB creditor to Sri Lanka. A small elite of less than 1% of the global population controls much of the wealth and income in the world. According to Oxfam International, the richest 1% had nearly twice as much wealth as the rest of the world put together over the past 2 years. These are essential facts, and the inequality is growing. So the future of the planet and of humanity lies in the hands of this billionaire class. Like the colonial elites before them, they work in collaboration with local elites, putting profit and self-interest before environmental sustainability and human well-being. Given neoliberal cooperative deregulation, there are hardly any controls now over the expansion of artificial intelligence, robotics, genetic engineering, and other market-cum technological advances which are changing the nature of life on the planet fundamentally. In fact, the CEOs of some of the artificial intelligence firms are asking for regulation because things have gone so much out of control. The future that is envisioned by the World Economic Forum's post-COVID Great Set is a technological and market-based utopia. A world where all the resources are owned and controlled by the global corporate elite and their local partners, while the masses of humanity own nothing but are said to be happy. By this, they mean that the people will become passive, robotic transhumans merged with technology. It seems that the brave new world that Aldous Huxley predicted in 1931 is already here. It is a world where people come to adore the very technology and consumerism that undo their capacities to think and feel. That is a world and countries like Sri Lanka dominated by corporate media and corporate-funded organizational propaganda which use the language of freedom, democracy, human rights, and even environmental sustainability. And this is particularly so in the case of social media. A few years ago, US State Department Undersecretary for South Asia referred to Sri Lanka as a valuable piece of real estate in the Indian Ocean. As discussed extensively in my book, and as we all know, Sri Lanka's strategic location in the heart of the Indian Ocean, in one of the busiest maritime trading routes, has made Sri Lanka the locus of geopolitical rivalry and external intervention. China, India, and the USA, as well as others, are competing to control local ports, land, and other natural resources. The dominant neoliberal policy framework including IMF debt restructuring, seeks to privatize and commoditize state-owned land, enterprises, and other assets and transfer ownership to corporations, mostly foreign-owned. So where does this leave Sri Lanka and the ordinary Sri Lankan people? When independent farming communities are dispossessed of their land and uprooted from their ancestral homes by agribusiness, they are turned into a disposable surplus population. And this is a global phenomenon which is happening around the world. Those who are able to leave the island, go abroad, especially the young professionals, are leaving in droves, leaving the country open to further exploitation by external forces and their local collaborators. And this again is not just a future scenario, this is what's happening right now. The country is subjected to all manner of political, economic, and military interventions. And just to give one or two examples, one being the wind power project in Mannar, awarded to the Indian Adani company, despite its abysmal environmental record. And another is the signing of the controversial AXA and SOFA military agreements with the United States. If the current trajectory of unregulated neoliberal economic policies and subservience to foreign political and military interests continue, there would not be an independent economy or sovereign state of Sri Lanka, or even a unique culture for that matter. Sri Lanka is already a neo-colonial appendage, the locus of a proxy war between great powers. What is yet another scenario for the world and Sri Lanka? The hype of technology and market utopia aside, can humanity and life survive on planet Earth if the current trajectory of unregulated corporate expansion is allowed to continue? That is, the unregulated corporate expansion dominated by finance capital, as the professor mentioned. There's plenty of evidence all around us, like the wildfires raging in Canada right now, that unless the climate emergency is addressed with more than symbolic gestures and false solutions, such as the Paris Climate Agreement and carbon trading, environmental and social collapse will hasten the demise of the human species itself. Like many countries in the global south, Sri Lanka has a minuscule carbon footprint. Yet, Sri Lanka is a country most affected by extreme weather events. Sri Lanka is faced with massive coastal erosion with adverse impact on 55% of her shoreline. The island is also identified with the highest relative risk of being displaced by disaster in South Asia. In other words, the very environmental and social survival of the island are at stake. So, is there another future scenario besides the extreme techno-market utopia on the one hand, and environmental collapse and the extinction of biodiversity, including human species, on the other hand? Many look to China and the BRICS as the alternative to the imperialism of the US and the West, that is, in demise. But we need to ask if BRICS also present a new partnership model, or if it is continuing the model of domination, particularly if one looks at the relationship between India and Sri Lanka. Albert Einstein said that the significant problems we have cannot be resolved at the same level of thinking with which we created them. There's a recognition that these problems are human-created, and therefore we need to have human solutions. We need a transformation of consciousness from the prevailing domination paradigm, which is based on the dualism of self versus the other, which is based on excessive individualism and competition. We need a shift to a collective and ecological paradigm which is based on the truth of interdependence. That is, that we are part of nature and that we are part of each other and that we cannot survive without upholding that interdependence, whereas that the dominant framework, the techno-capitalist framework, is built on fragmentation and separation. So this fundamental reality needs to be faced, and we have to recognize ourselves as a species in nature rather than becoming an appendage to the market and technology, which is what is happening right now. Despite its dilemmas and the myopia and disempowerment currently pervading Sri Lankan society, we must remember our unique and proud heritage, the environmentally advanced hydraulic civilization of the past, the history of resistance against colonialism and neocolonialism. For example, the 1818 and 1848 rebellions against the British, and more recently, the movement against the United States Millennium Challenge Cooperation Compact. While it may be a cliche, it is nevertheless true that crisis can be an opportunity for change. Positive change, that is, not like the kind of Aragale-led change, which also made use of the crisis as an opportunity. There are many committed individuals, organizations, and networks around the world envisioning and working towards an alternative world of environmental sustainability and human well-being, a world of greater harmony and partnership with nature and each other. And I believe that we each have a responsibility and a role to play to transcend the apathy, despair, and fear that is pervading not only this country, but around the world. As Crisis in Sri Lanka and the World argues, we as Sri Lankans need to come together across social class, ethno-religious divides, and work with others regionally and internationally. We need to question the dominant thinking, the faulty ideology, to create a livable future in both Sri Lanka and the world. Thank you very much.